You listen to this podcast because you like books, or maybe because you like learning, or maybe you just like the sound of my voice lulling you to sleep. If it's the first two, Audible has you covered. Too busy to read? Driving and don't want to run into another dog? Audible is a huge library of audiobooks where people read to you like you're a kid again. And guess what? You can try it out for free. Just go to readlearnlivepodcast.com/audible to sign up for your free trial today.
I guess the experience has stayed with me as a reminder that although you may walk the same streets as a peer, their lives may be very different than yours. So it's important to take the blinders off and see the world as it really is.
Hello and welcome to Read, Learn, Live, the podcast about improving yourself through literature. I'm your acclaimed host, John Monaster, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 23. We're celebrating a year here at Read, Learn, Live, and I just wanted to thank all of you listening for sticking around as I talk with all the most interesting people I can find. To celebrate, I'm taking a month off to wander the world. After this episode, it'll be mid-October before a new one comes out. In the meantime, go out and enjoy yourselves. And as always, if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured, or have authors you want to put me in touch with, you can reach me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with Supriya Kelkar about her book, Ahimsa. Supriya Kelkar was born and raised in the Midwest. She learned Hindi as a child by watching 3 Bollywood films a week. After college, she realized her lifelong dream of working in the film industry when she got a job as a Bollywood screenwriter. She has credits on 1 Hollywood film and several Hindi films. Ahimsa, inspired by her great-grandmother's role in the Indian freedom movement, is her debut middle-grade novel. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. All right, everyone, welcome to the Read, Learn, Live podcast. I'm your host, John Monaster. Today I'm here with Supriya Kelkar and her book, Ahimsa. Really excited to talk about this book. It is a book for young adults, but I think it has something for everyone and gets into some really interesting issues. And so first, I'd like to welcome Supriya to the show. Supriya, say hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Great. Glad to have you here. And maybe just start off by telling us what the book is all about.
Sure. It's historical fiction, and it takes place in 1942 in British-ruled India. After Mahatma Gandhi asked each family to give 1 member to the nonviolent freedom movement, 10-year-old Anjali is devastated to think of her father joining the fight and possibly risking his life. But it turns out he's not the one going, her mother is. And as the family gets more and more involved in the resistance, Anjali must confront her privilege and her prejudices to ensure that their little part in the movement gets completed.
Very succinct. I like it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's much more complicated than that.
Yes.
Yeah, I like to start off with a couple questions about the writing process. I think that's important and helpful for thinking about the book as a whole.
Sure.
So first off, why did you decide to write this particular book? Why did you want to tell this story?
So back in 2003, I was working on some scripts for this Indian production company I work for, and I couldn't get my great-grandmother's story out of my head. So after Mahatma Gandhi made this request for each family to give 1 member, my great-grandfather, they needed his income to survive, basically. So they decided that she would go. And she worked with Gandhi. She was imprisoned for her role in the freedom movement and later went on to become a 2-term congresswoman. And I thought it was just such a cool story of persistence, featuring a strong female character from a time in history that we don't always hear these kinds of stories. So it felt like it just had to be told. And although the story is now completely fictional, I think it still retains those themes of girl power and persisting despite adversity that attracted me to the project in the first place.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, you are a Hollywood and Bollywood screenwriter. That's something you've done for a while now. How was making that transition from writing screenplays and working in that industry to sitting down and writing a book?
At first, it was pretty difficult. So I had originally intended on making Ahimsa. I mean, what wouldn't be called Ahimsa? It would have been my great grandmother's story, like a biopic. And then I decided this story would be better fictionalized. And when trying to figure that screenplay out, it still wasn't working. So I had this brilliant idea to write a novel. I thought I'd be able to dig deeper into the story and it'd be quick and easy. And then I could take all the stuff I learned and put it back into the script. So clearly I didn't know what I was doing because writing a novel was not quick and easy. But I learned I, I learned more about the way novels work, and I struggled with the format initially because in screenwriting, you're taught to be sparse with descriptions unless it's vital to the story. Um, so, because you don't know, you're not going to describe what someone's wearing because who knows what the costume designer is going to put them in, or you're not going to describe the room because you don't know what the set designer is going to do to it. So it took me a while to realize that, yes, I should describe these things in a novel so that the reader, it's not a viewer, it's a reader, knows what's going on. And you're also taught to not direct the actors because you're the screenwriter and not the director. So my go-to phrase in screenwriting is off a certain character's name if you want to see what their reaction is, like off Anjali, which means like the camera is holding on her and we're seeing her reaction. So when I went to write a novel, that sort of ended up translating into me saying that Anjali was looking at herself, or looking down or looking at another character. And it took me a while to realize that in a novel, you can take your time explaining how characters interact with their world, and they can do a lot more than just looking at someone or looking down when they want to express an emotion. So it took me a while, but I got it, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning. So yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
And so what was your writing process when you were actually sitting down and making the book happen?
So because of my screenwriting background, like we're always taught that outlining is so very important and structure is everything. So once I get an idea for this book or any other book, I start with Blake Snyder's beat sheets. He wrote a bunch of books with the theme of Save the Cat, is their title. And so I use his beat sheet to find out the big turning points and the story beats I need to work toward. And then I come up with character sketches for each character. So that's also from screenwriting, where you just write about their past and their family and everything just to get to know them a little better so that they become three-dimensional characters. And then I spend several days trying to think about problem areas, and then I start outlining each chapter, and then I start writing.
Okay, very, very
the
methodical.
actual book. So, yeah.
Makes sense. And what's the hardest part of
Yeah.
all that?
Probably outlining for me, I think, more than the actual writing of the book. The structure takes me a while to figure out.
And was there a time that you wrote something that surprised you, either in the outline or once you had the outline during the actual book itself? Something a character did, or maybe something you learned while exploring?
Yeah. When writing the scene where Anjali gets caught up in the riots, I I knew what was going to happen to each character in terms of who's going to be safe and who isn't, but I just didn't know how I was going to end that chapter. So I just sort of that was one beat in the outline that I didn't really have totally worked out. So I just sort of went where it was taking me, and I was just typing away. And I got that moment where Anjali runs into Captain Brent's arms after he breaks up that fight. And I really liked how complex that made both their characters in that moment. And, they clearly don't like each other. But in that moment, there's this split second of bonding that really surprised me. And I think I liked the depth it gave those characters.
Mm-hmm. And was there any particular moment of inspiration you had while you were writing the book?
I think so. I had been researching the Rani of Jhansi, that's the Queen of Jhansi, who was a real life queen in the 1800s who fought against the British, like physically fought in war. And so I was researching her for another book I was writing at the same time as one of our rounds of editing on Ahimsa. And I think I mentioned her in passing in Ahimsa
Hmm.
in an earlier draft, but um, it was while working on another book that I realized, it could be kind of cool to tie in the crayons that Irfan always gives Anjali as a present into the crayon drawing of the Rani of Jhansi that she made as a child. And it gave me that moment between Anjali and her father about the drawing. And then it gave me a moment between Anjali and her mother in jail later about the drawing. So to me, it was just kind of cool to get inspiration on one project while working on another, like a buy one get one free deal.
Yeah.
Everyone likes a
Yeah,
BOGO
of
deal,
course.
so yeah.
Oh, it sounds great
Right.
and
Yeah,
unexpected.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, so moving on to the book itself, let's just start with the title. What is Ahimsa, and why is it so important to the book?
So ahimsa means nonviolence, and it's a basic tenet of a lot of religions out of India, like Hinduism and Jainism. And it's important to the book because it was the also the basic fact of Gandhi's nonviolent movement, where he had this revolutionary idea that you could gain independence for a country not through a physical fight, but through a peaceful one of civil disobedience. And um, you know, I think it's important for younger readers as well, because it's ahimsa is a tool anyone can use. You don't need to be trained in battle to use ahimsa. So unlike actual war where you're winning with weapons and all of that, this is something any kid can actually use to change their world. So um, I think that's why I chose to name the book that as well.
Hmm. It's a tool that's available to everyone.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, so let's talk about this main character, Anjali. She's just so complex and really just interesting and fascinating to me. And she really goes through a real transformation. Maybe just talk a little bit about all that. She starts at the beginning of the book, just knowing that she can only handle what happened to her mom by hurting the captain back,
Hmm.
and she really felt that it was important not being poor and her clothes mattered, and the
Right.
events of the book start to change her and impact her, and some of those things don't matter anymore, and she's not so much into hurting and violence, and she becomes very important in the nonviolence movement, and ultimately, by the end of the book, is putting her life on the line to protect
Right.
some of those people that she previously hated. So, just maybe talk a little bit about how all that happens. How did her character evolve through the book?
Yeah, I think so. Like you said, Anjali starts off as a child of privilege, and she's middle class, but she definitely lives a comfortable life, and especially as an only child whose parents dote on her, and she has this love for the her really rich-looking ghagra cholis, the skirt and blouses that girls in her town at that time in India wore. And she was also sort of unique because in traditional Indian culture, back now, but more so back then, you did not talk back to your parents or question them really. But she's the rare child who does speak up and speaks back. And like you said, when she thinks Captain Brent wronged her mother, the only way she knows how to handle it is to hurt him back. It's sort of this age appropriate eye for an eye view of justice, but it's also one that comes from someone who hasn't seen much adversity in her life. So it's easy for her to say, like, you wronged me, I'm going to wrong you, and there'll be no consequences to this because she has such a limited sort of worldview at the beginning of the book. And then over the course of the story, she starts to realize that other people are not as privileged as her, and there are real issues all around her, and they can't be solved in an instant just because she wants it fixed. So, and I think one of the people who are most influential to her change is her friend Mohan, who's the untouchable boy, the Dalit boy who helps her see how blind she's been to the realities in her town and in her whole country, and helps her grow. So
Yeah, so you just mentioned that right at the end, the untouchables, the delete. So who exactly are they, and you know, what extent are there people similar to them in our society today? How are we dealing with them now?
So, in the ancient Hindu caste system, there were four traditional castes. There was and it's a hierarchy. So at the top were the priest caste, then the warrior caste, then the like tradespeople or merchant caste, and then the laborers and artisans. And people who didn't fit into those groups, who were considered wrongly, but considered below the fourth caste, you could say they formed a fifth caste, and they were known as by this terrible term, untouchables. And because of the jobs they were forced to do in this hierarchy, they were considered unclean. And some people thought that even like if you touch them, you'd be polluted. You'd have to do something, bathe or do something to cleanse yourself of their touch. And while the caste system is no longer legal in India, there's still several instances today of Dalits being discriminated against or having crimes committed against them thanks to this old idea. And I think we can draw parallels to our society here in the systemic racism in America and how it can be sort of frustrating when some people think, oh, but we're all equal. That's the law here, but that's not really the case. Even if the law says it, everything isn't equal for everyone just because it's written in the law, and we have to fight to correct injustices, and address and correct privilege.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a core takeaway is that the fight is not over. It can
Right.
seem like there's been a lot of progress made, and there has been a lot of progress made, but there still is a long way to go. And
Yeah,
that's just interesting to
exactly.
think about that even from when the time this book was written into today, there's still plenty of room.
Right.
And yeah, and so throughout this book, really, whether it's the Dalits or Anjali or the freedom fighters or everyone, there are these constant highs and lows. Things get better for them, and then things get worse again, and things get better, and things get worse again, and it's just this constant emotional roller coaster. I feel like, I mean, I was certainly just like, yay, things are finally going. Oh no, it just fell apart again.
Right.
Like, and that's what makes the story engaging and interesting, right? I mean, if everything was just wonderful all the time, it wouldn't be so interesting. But it's a lot. And so maybe just talk a little bit about how the characters in the book are dealing with this constant adversity and what we can learn from that.
Yeah, it is quite the roller coaster. Sorry. But I wanted it to be true to life where
Mm-hmm.
we can experience these amazing highs and terrible lows, sometimes in the same day, even. So um, I guess while each character deals with the stress of constant adversity in their own ways, like Anjali's mother, who's called Ma in the book, she's always sort of impulsively rushing to find a solution and sometimes making things worse because she's not always thinking it through or understanding the problem that she's finding an answer for. Or Anjali's great uncle, who's Chachaji in the book, he sort of shuts down when things go wrong and sulks or takes lots of
Mm-hmm.
naps. So I think no matter how they deal with it, they all know deep down that you have to keep fighting for what's right, and you have to go on. And that's what I especially wanted the younger readers to get out of this book, that things often don't go our way in life, and but if there's a cause you believe in, you have to keep sticking up for it and speaking out against things that are wrong.
Yeah, and that's such a great message, I think, to get across that this has all happened before. Like the fact
Right.
that there have been injustices and problems and fights, and you're not alone. This isn't the first time that you're having to
Yeah.
solve this, and you can draw inspiration from elsewhere. So I thought that was a really powerful
Right.
message in the book.
Thank you. Thanks.
So yeah, speaking of problems, there are just a lot of negative forces pushing back here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Anjali and her mom are really pushing towards change, and everybody else, it seems like at various points, do not want that to happen, whether it's
Yeah.
Muslims, other Hindus, other members of their caste who get mad at them, other castes, the British who have their own interests. Everyone just
Yeah.
kind of is not happy with what they're up to in one way or another.
Right.
And so to me, this brought up this question. I mean, why are people so adverse to change? And especially in the case that there are some people where the change might have actually benefited them, in one way or another, and
Yeah.
why it might be so important to keep a status quo.
Yeah, I think a lot of people at that time had very different ideas of how that change should take place, even if they all wanted the same general
Mm,
goal. So some people had a difference of opinion on the timeline for when the transition of control over India should take place. Some people had a difference of opinion of how it should be done. Should India be split into different countries? And then, like you said, some people were were just fine with the way things were. Um, you know, I guess I guess some of those people didn't like change because they were not affected by some of the issues and that that were affecting others, and they didn't see a need for the change. And I guess maybe it's hard sometimes for all these people with such big differences to in opinion on this topic to see eye to eye and come up with a common solution for the change, I guess. So
mm. And do you think that's common? I mean, do you think when there's big issues like this is something that is going to always happen, and there's not really an easy solution here?
I think so. I think it's all always a little
Yeah,
complicated in real life. So yeah.
yeah, fair enough. Well, you did a great job of showcasing that here, and really making
Oh,
sure all
thank
the
you.
different groups kind of were represented and got their say. But I think also what was important here is that all the different groups were humanized. It wasn't like other casts were made to look horrible. We got to see their
Hmm.
perspective. We got to, Anjali had a Muslim friend, and we got to see their perspective, and we saw the British
Yeah.
perspective. And so I think that was important in making sure the reader understood that it wasn't just everybody being crazy and Anjali. It was
Right.
everyone has their own thoughts and ideas, and they're real people, and that's
Right.
the way of the world. So
Right. And they're entitled to their opinions based on their life experiences, I guess.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I liked you had a couple of great metaphors. I thought. I mean, there's lots of interesting metaphors in the book, but you had a couple that I thought really linked well together. You wrote, "Sometimes it's hard to see everything going on in the garden when your nest is perched at the top of the tree." And you also wrote, "The horse has those golden pink blinders next to his eyes, so he doesn't see anything else around him. Don't get panicked. You have blinders on. We walk the same path, but our experiences are so different." And this was one cast member talking to another cast member at different
Hmm.
different levels. So
Yeah.
I thought that was such an interesting way of thinking about the world. So I was wondering if you had any personal stories or personal experiences when you noticed you or something else kind of walking with those blinders on.
Yeah. So the line about the horse, especially, that came from my own childhood. It a lot of eye-opening moments happened for me when I would go visit my family in India as a child. I would leave the comfort of my grandparents' homes or my dad's childhood bungalow, which is the house I based Anjali's house on, and I'd step outside and there'd be affluent people walking, and then there would be children begging on the sides of the street next to the restaurants and movie theaters and gold and diamond jewelry stores that we were entering. Um, and it really stunned me because here were kids my age who looked like me in the general sense, and we were literally on the same street, but I was born into some level of privilege and they were not. Um, and so that really stayed with me and led to the writing of that line. And then here, I guess the biggest eye-opening moment for me happened in college. I was a psychology major at the University of Michigan, and for one of our courses, we had to get practical experience by leaving the classroom and getting involved in a community project. And the project my group worked on was a community garden at an elementary school in Detroit. And I was so stunned to see that the computers that they were using in the school were these really old, dated ones. I hope I'm remembering correctly, but I think they were the green and black ones, not in full color, that I used in elementary school decades earlier. So I guess it made me realize in this really deep way the inequality that I had been blind to, because I was growing up just a few minutes away from, half an hour away from Detroit, and my experience was totally different from my peers in another area. And I guess the experience has stayed with me as a reminder that although you may walk the same streets as a peer, their lives may be very different than yours. So it's important to take the blinders off and see the world as it really is.
Yeah, I agree. That's an important message,
Thanks.
and something I think that I at least see all the time in New York City, right? Living here, it's
Right.
the exact same experience where there are people that have enormous wealth and there are people that live in enormous poverty, and they're sort of all together. They're all wandering the streets
Right.
together, and so it's very important to at least acknowledge that, and not
Yeah,
to just
absolutely.
ignore what's happening.
Right. Right.
So yeah, that makes sense. So for the last third of the book or so, Anjali's mother is arrested and imprisoned, and this is just a major event turning point. Something I'm
Hmm.
sure you outlined very carefully.
Yes.
So this is a big deal, right? Having your mom taken away. I can't even imagine what that would have been like. And
Yeah.
she kind of keeps the fight going, but Anjali's mom starts a hunger strike while she's in prison, just like Gandhi had done. And I'm just curious to talk a little bit about Anjali's mother as a character, and what motivates her to take these extreme measures, and why at the beginning of the book she does join the freedom fighter movement.
Yeah. She decides to become a freedom fighter after realizing the British captain she worked for and the government in general didn't see Indians as equals and weren't treating them fairly. And I think she has a bit of guilt for not, maybe even if she realized it earlier, not doing anything about it earlier. So she's very impulsive, and she will just think she has a solution and sort of go for it, whether or not it's right, or whether it's not right, whether or not if it's right for that scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the hunger strike she takes, although the idea of fasting until something changes is pretty extreme, fasting is actually a pretty common part of Hinduism and Jainism and other religions in India. So not everyone does it, but it's common enough that pretty much everyone has a relative who fasts one day a week or on certain occasions. And it it may be a fast where you just take water, or with lime juice like Ma was doing, or it could be, I skip 2 meals and then eat something very plain for dinner or something. But so culturally, there's this basis for being able to handle it, although Ma has no idea if she'll be able to handle fasting for as long as she does. But because she just sort of reacts when she hears that Gandhi has started this long fast, it inspires her to do the same, even though she doesn't have the same clout Gandhi does, and the whole world isn't watching to make sure that she, doesn't starve to death. But she can't think of anything else to do behind bars to keep on making an impact, and she's desperate to still do her part. So she does that.
Yeah, and I think that's just so noble, right? I mean, this book is full of sort of ordinary people in extraordinary situations, and thinking about what we might do in that situation is just so interesting to me. It's like, okay, if I was in
Yeah,
jail and I went through all of this, the jail is horrible enough already, and you describe it as such, with the trash
right.
or waste not being taken out and all this. And it's like, on top of that,
Yeah.
she's making this decision to go on a hunger strike. And I think that just makes her such a strong and powerful character, and someone that Anjali can look up to. So I think that
Yeah. Yeah.
that's it's very important and inspiring.
Thanks. Yeah.
Another of the big plot developments of the book is this constant push to allow the schools to be integrated. And I think it was Anjali that even came up with the idea, but she wanted the Dalit to be able to go to school with everybody else because since they were untouchables, they weren't allowed to join everyone else. But they're kids
Yeah.
and they need to learn. And so she starts off by getting giving them lessons just where they're at, and eventually her school teacher comes to them, gives them lessons, and but overall, she really wants to bring them to school to let them be part of that experiences, and she's really passionate about it. And to me, this drew a lot of parallels. I mean, I thought that integrating schools was also a big part of the desegregation fight here in America, and I'm sure
Right.
elsewhere that I'm not aware of. And so that was so interesting to me. It's like I wonder how often in these situations sort of school integration becomes a big issue, and why it is that
Right.
parents keep their kids separated in one way or another. So I guess I'm curious about what lessons you think we can learn from how Anjali fought it, and maybe at a higher level why this is the case so often. Why are schools kind of a flashpoint for these types of problems?
Right. I guess because in an ideal world, every child should be treated equally and have equal access to education. And of course, that's not the reality, even when schools aren't segregated,
Mm-hmm.
because a person's zip code can determine what kind of access they get to education or what kind of resources are available in their school. But, as a start, no one should be denied access to schooling or be forced to be segregated in school for any reason because separate but equal is not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you're separated, you are not equal,
Yeah.
right? You're not assumed to be equal. There's a reason you're being separated. So um, I I I guess, Anjali makes mistakes in thinking the transition will be smooth for the Dalit children and her neighbors. And she learns in the real world things don't always turn out the way we envision. But I guess one thing we can learn from Anjali is persistence. And no matter how awful things get and the setbacks she faces, she takes her time to grieve and feel bad. And then she goes right back to focusing on her goal and trying to get it done.
So one thing I did want to ask though, and this is just a sort of a discrepancy I noticed. So I was curious if this was on purpose or what the reasoning was here, and that was the character of Jamuna, who is the
Mm-hmm.
family's maid and is a lower caste character than the family, and she's there throughout the whole book. She's there for Anjali. When Anjali's mom goes to prison, Jamuna takes over and is taking care of her, and the family really keeps her employed throughout the entire book,
Mm-hmm.
even though they don't keep employed some of the deletes that were doing stuff like taking out sewage. They decide they're going to do that now because that's something that they feel strongly about. So I was
Yeah.
curious why they decided to get rid of some low caste people but keep some other low caste people. I mean, was there a weird discrepancy there, or are maids treated differently for whatever reason?
Well, so the way the caste system is set up, there are four castes, and those who aren't categorized into that, were called untouchables. Are called Dalits
Mm-hmm.
now. That's a newer term, but when the system was first designed, they were called this horrible term of untouchables. And so all the other castes, they don't face this any sort of stigma due
Mm-hmm.
to their caste in the same way as a Dalit would back then, because they're not considered unclean or that if their shadow falls on you, anything bad's going to happen. So there's like that sort of separation in the hierarchy, like you know. So although Jamuna is lower caste, she's not prevented from doing other jobs in the same way that back then a Dalit of the time would have been prevented from doing something different than what their family's been doing for centuries. So when I was doing character sketches before starting this book, I envisioned Jamuna's coming from a poor family where her mother was a seamstress and her father worked as an assistant to a clerk in an office. So while poverty and socioeconomic status has prevented Jamuna from some professions, being a maid is the line of work she has chosen for herself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something forced upon her the way manual scavenging, which is the act of cleaning out dry latrines, which are toilets that don't go into the sewer
Yeah.
but just have a container under them, is forced upon like Mohan, the Dalit boy in this book. So because of that, Anjali's family doesn't feel like they need to stop her from working or for them or intervene in her life in any way. Like even the school Anjali goes to, it has children of all castes and different religions, Muslims and Hindus together, but it did not have Dalits. So that's sort of, there was that separation there.
Okay. Makes sense. So I have a couple last little wrap up questions here, and one of them is this is a children's kind of young adult book, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you briefly touched on a couple of the ideas that you were hoping kids would get out of this, but I was just curious about what sorts of conversations you hope this might spark between children and their parents as kids are reading the book.
So I guess one of the things would be how they could use ahimsa or civil disobedience in their own life, maybe to stick up for something they believe in. Lee and Low Books, the publisher, also has a great teacher's guide on their website for ahimsa. And one of the questions is it asks the reader, do you think America has its own version of the caste system? And I thought that was a really fascinating question. And I hope this book will spark conversations like that between children and their parents. And I hope it will challenge kids to take their blinders off, become more aware of inequality in their world, and as Gandhi said, alter the course of history and make a change.
Mm-hmm. And then more broadly, for anyone reading the book, because I think the book is also accessible to adults, and adults can read it and get very
Mm.
interesting things from it. I mean, are there any other lessons or ideas or anything you had hoped people would get from the book that we haven't talked about yet today?
Um, Not really. I mean, I think it's sort of that idea that, just because we're all considered equal, it isn't the case for everybody in our society. And maybe think about how we can work to change that and what are we doing that's allowing it to happen. So I think conversations like that could happen on an adult
Yeah,
level.
yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. Cool. All right. Well, I want to end up the conversation with what I call the thunder round, just some kind of getting to know you
Okay.
questions, and then we'll call it a day. Sound good?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So, what is your favorite food and or drink?
So although I may tell my children it's quinoa, it's not. It's samosas, which are these triangular shaped um, fried. It's fried dough with potatoes and peas inside, and it's served with a tamarind chutney, and it's really
Yeah.
good. So
Awesome.
yeah.
What about what your favorite place you've ever been is?
Definitely India. I would say the city of Ahmedabad, which is where my dad grew up, and also Mumbai, where Bollywood is. Those are two of my
That's
favorite
it.
places.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so the big one is if you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing, what would it be and why?
Um, I would go back in time if the magic wand allows that. And okay, and I would change things so that when I was growing up in my hometown, I would have had more pride in being Indian, in my being Indian American and in my culture. I grew up in a town that wasn't very diverse, and there were lots of incidents of microaggressions and racist bullying. And as an adult looking back on it all, I just wish I hadn't let others make me feel ashamed for the color of my skin and my background, and that I had confidence in who I was a little earlier.
That sounds great.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Where's that magic
Yeah,
wand?
I know. Hold
Yeah.
on. Let me just send it your way.
Okay, great.
Um, awesome. Well, this has been a really great conversation. I've been talking with Supriya Kelkar. Her book is Ahimsa, and it is out in just a couple weeks, I believe.
Yeah, October
October
2nd.
2nd.
Yep.
It is out. You can buy
Which
it.
is Gandhi's birthday.
Uh,
Yeah.
I'm sure by accident that release date
Right. How
happened.
did that happen?
But
Yeah.
it will be available on Amazon, anywhere you can find books, and I highly, highly recommend it for both kids and adults. And thank you so much, Supriya, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on here. This was great.
Great. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.